Time for the bad news. Really bad news, actually. Being trans is more or less no longer a protected status in the United States. Your transgenderism, or I guess cisgenderism, in a world where people are discriminated against for being cis, which, by the way, is the world we live in, that's me, is no longer a condition along which people can violate your civil rights. So that's cool. The Supreme Court today upheld Tennessee's ban on gender-affirming care for trans minors. 6-3 decision, of course. Effectively protects from legal challenges many efforts by Trump's Republican administration and state governments to roll back protections for trans people. Another 26 states have laws similar to Tennessee's. The book's open now. You can discriminate against trans people, like, pretty openly. You know, yeah, landlords kicking people out. It's going to be very difficult to challenge these with lawsuits now that the Supreme Court has essentially affirmed the idea that it's not a protected status. This case carries with it the weight of fierce scientific and policy debates about the safety, efficacy, and propriety of medical treatments in an evolving field. The voices in these debates raise sincere concern. The implications are all profound, Roberts wrote. The Equal Protection Clause does not resolve these disagreements, nor does it afford us license to debate them as we see best. So, yeah, it's pretty bad. Don't really know what to say, man. It's pretty damn bad. See, the argument is, okay, the Equal Protection Clause, it means that it's illegal to discriminate against people based on their protected statuses, right? So you can't discriminate against a person based on their race, you know, their sex, their nationality, stuff like that. You know, a landlord can't say, well, I'm not going to, you know, I'm not going to take you in because you're black or whatever. You understand. Now, historically, the argument has been that trans people are also a protected status. Your transness or cisness counts because if you're being discriminated against for being trans, are you not essentially being discriminated against based on your sex, right? Like, if you are a transgender woman and you are being kept, for example, from a woman's space, the argument essentially is any discrimination against you for being a trans woman is effectively discrimination against you for having the sex of a man, if you understand that's the legal argument. And frankly, it's a correct one. It's unambiguously correct. Obviously, if you are targeting a trans woman for her transness, you're going after her for her sex, just not the sex that she's, you know, necessarily psyched about. That's undone. That's done now. This is effectively revoked, this argument, even though it's been affirmed in prior cases. In fact, I believe Scalia even has affirmed this interpretation in the past. Does this mean it's legal to discriminate against cis people for not being trans? Sure, go for it. Some providers have stopped treatment already. Yeah, it's not looking great. It's huge. In fact, it might actually be the single largest blow to the rights of trans people in modern times. I'm trying to think, but like, this precedent established by the Supreme Court essentially excludes them from the Equal Protection Clause. It's quite bad. How does this affect states that have protections for trans people in law? This ruling does not affect those states. This is not about saying it's unconstitutional to afford protections for trans people. It's saying that discrimination against trans people is not a violation of the Constitution. That isn't true. This case didn't overturn Bostock. It's a different legal question. It's very bad, but it's not quite that bad. I don't think it formally overturned that protection. I think that in a practical sense, it kind of has, though. In its use, I think that's more or less what we're looking at. I think it damages it, but there is still a legal argument for protection. I mean, good luck. Could this open the floodgate to women, black people, immigrants, etc.? Not necessarily, because those categories are explicitly protected by the Equal Protections Clause. Those categories are outlined specifically. Doesn't matter if it does or doesn't. Well, it does. I mean, it essentially means that all of the lawsuits against the ban to transgender healthcare across these states, they're dead. Like, they're not going to work, you know? Because basically all of those lawsuits are predicated on the assumption that being transgender is, you know, that's a protected demographic identifier. Doesn't really work anymore. Genuinely, what is the point of this? Well, the Supreme Court, the conservatives on the Supreme Court, I should say, don't like it when the Trump administration tries to make their jobs irrelevant by getting rid of the concept of constitutional law, but they do like hurting marginalized people. So, you know, you're going to get these edge cases here where the Supreme Court will like 9-0 on the question of, you know, returning Abrego Garcia. But then here, of course, we get the classic 6-3 ruling. The case raised foundational constitutional questions, whether trans people constitute a class triggering higher constitutional scrutiny, whether laws targeting them violate equal protection, and whether the Constitution guarantees the right to access medically necessary treatment. The court sidestepped nearly all of those options, instead issuing a narrower opinion that carves out an exception permitting medical discrimination based on gender dysphoria, a distinction it bizarrely treats as separate from discrimination against trans people. I think this is essentially meaningless, especially because from the conservative mindset, right, a trans person is defined by their dysphoria, something they consider a mental illness, you know? Like, from the conservative framework, the distinction is meaningless because it exists in the context of this illness. Yeah, I don't know if they're going to go with the non-dysphoric trans people, like, side option there. Wouldn't this make it legal for conservatives to ban all trans healthcare entirely? Yeah, essentially. At least it allows states to. Also, I mean, we're past the looking glass. We didn't talk about this that much, but you realize, like, just a few days ago, hold on, let me see if I can find it. The Veterans Association is going to have the ability to discriminate against people based on their political opinions, you know, with regard to whether or not they get medical care. This article is talking about how the VA says that this report is false, but the Veterans Association is currently a branch of the federal, you know, government, so I would not trust what they say. The Department of Veterans Affairs has denied reports that doctors would be allowed to discriminate against veterans based on political affiliation or marital status under new guidelines. The Guardian first reported a rule change allowing doctors and other medical professionals working for the VA to refuse to treat patients based on political or marital status. Macaulay Porter, VA Deputy Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs, told News Nation on Tuesday that the changes to bylaws do not override other federal rules preventing discrimination. These updates will have no impact whatsoever on who the VA treats or employs. I don't really believe them. We need to cut all medical care to all conservatives when we win back power. That's true. New rule no longer prohibits the VA from discriminating against potential employees based on national origin, marital status, political affiliation, sexual orientation, or membership in a labor union. A spokesperson for The Guardian said the story is not being retracted. No plans to retract the story. Yeah, they made the change for a reason. Unironically, red state's the biggest drain to our social safety net. Cut the dead weight. All right, well, let's stay focused here, okay? Let's stay focused here. In the majority opinion, the plaintiffs argue that SB 1 warrants heightened scrutiny because it relies on sex-based classifications, but neither of the above classifications turns on sex. Rather, SB 1 prohibits healthcare providers from administering puberty blockers or hormones to minors for certain medical uses, regardless of a minor's sex. By the same token, SB 1 does not exclude any individual from medical treatments on the basis of transgender status. Rather, it removes one set of diagnoses, gender dysphoria, gender identity disorder, and gender incongruence, from the range of treatable conditions. In issuing such a ruling, the court asserts that discrimination based on gender dysphoria is somehow distinct from discrimination on the basis of transgender status or sex, creating a loophole wide enough to drive a truck through. As always, Aaron Reed, well written. It's an inconsistent and irrational ruling, but it's doing exactly what it's meant to. Yeah, I don't know. It's pretty nasty. What's the Fox News take on this? Oh, this is MSNBC. What do you got? Only 10K views? Guess people don't care about this stuff.
We have some breaking news right now from the Supreme Court that we need to bring in. We're just getting a decision having to do with transgender care for minors.
Nah, give me the Fox News take.
Also this, moments ago, breaking at the Supreme Court, the justices there have issued a decision on Tennessee's ban on sex reassignment medical care for minors. The Supreme Court upholding the Tennessee law that bans certain types of gender-affirming care. Let's bring in Shannon Bream on this. Shannon, it's the first time really that the High Court is considering this type of care or restrictions on this type of care for children in America.
Yeah, and this has been one of the most watched cases of the entire term because there are many other states that also have some kind of limit or ban on trans treatment for minor children. So this has gotten a ton of attention, and essentially the court's ruling 6-3. There are concurrences and breaks here and there, but the majority opinion says this. They says this case carries with it the weight of fierce scientific and policy debates about the safety, efficacy, and propriety of medical treatments in the evolving field. They say there are a lot of different studies out there. They came up during arguments, some of them saying other countries have limited or backed off these treatments for minors, but they say that's not our place, our decision to make, but essentially says our role is not to judge the wisdom, fairness, or logic of the law, but just to ensure that it does not violate the equal protection guarantee of the 14th Amendment. They said this law survives that scrutiny. So essentially concluding that it does, we leave questions of policy to the people, their elected representatives, and the democratic process, essentially saying Tennessee has passed this law. We're not going to step in.
Yeah, it's basically going to be impossible to win any lawsuit, specifically concerning bans on trans healthcare. It could apply to adults too, by the way. There's no reason, like this logic, the logic of the ruling is not specific to minors at all. It could apply to trans people broadly, easily.
And we think that it passes the constitutional muster of the 14th Amendment. So Tennessee can continue under this law to ban specific treatments that are trans-related for minors. And the other states out there, 20 plus of them, who have these laws will also take great reassurance that the court is signing off on what they've done.
Right now, Shannon, Justice Sotomayor is reading the dissent. And part of what she wrote is that this court now authorizes untold harm to transgender children and the parents and families who love them, end quote. How big of a setback is this for the transgender movement?
Well, it is in these states where there's a dividing line in this country about states who think that this is good policy for minors to have these treatments available, and others like Tennessee who think it doesn't. And Tennessee had argued that they had a state interest, a compelling government interest in making sure that these treatments did not proceed for young people. But it is one of those things that feels like it's making the country more red and more blue in concentrated ways, because there will be people who may decide where they live based on these laws and these decisions.
Yeah, I really would not fault them for that.
She does talk about this in her dissent. She says the court's willingness here to strike down this law and get into the health care bans does damage. She says irrevocable damage to the Equal Protection Clause, and invites legislatures to engage in discrimination by hiding blatant sex classifications in plain sight. Again, as you said, she said, without second thought, you're increasing untold harm to transgender children, their parents, and their families. She says there's no constitutional justification for this, so I dissent. So a split there, big decision. We didn't think we might get it until next week. There are a few more percolating out there, but this is one we've been watching.
Shannon, we know that this decision wrapped in consideration for puberty blockers and hormone therapy. What about surgery, the other contentious?
I swear to God, every time we watch any Fox News panel, somebody is always recovering from recent Botox. Every time, like literally, like every time, one of the people there.
Well, that wasn't a part of this case, essentially, which was, you know, a little bit of a mystery to folks about why that part of this was not challenged. But there are different parts to this law. So for right now, what it's saying is none of the puberty blockers can be done. None of those hormonal things can be offered to kids. Maybe there's another legal
hormonal things. Really approaching this topic with the level of care and expertise you'd expect from Fox.
Fight to come over the surgery aspect of this. But Tennessee has been kind of one of the forerunners and leaders in this. And there have been cases, as you guys know, because we've covered them, about people going inside these hospitals and whistleblowers and people saying there are things going on here that are in violation potentially of the law. So this now gives Tennessee the full-throated support of the Supreme Court to say your state has decided to do this. It passes constitutional muster. Now, as a state, you can enforce it.
If people are doing things that are against the law, then why hasn't Tennessee already been able to just arrest those people? What the f is that argument? So whistleblowers have revealed that at gender clinics there are doctors doing things that are against the law, against the existing Tennessee law, but somehow they needed to wait on the Supreme Court ruling. The law is already in effect. What do you mean? They already could have enforced that law. What are you talking about?
Shannon, this court, well, Back in the day, they would wrap things up in about a week's time, but they could go for another 2 weeks because July 2nd is a Wednesday. So I mean, they've gone past that, the June 30th deadline that we've seen in recent years. So that's possible. But you think about the other cases, and there's a big one on birthright citizenship.
Right.
Do we consider that to be the highest priority case before them now? And could that come last?
I would say yes on that.
If you don't have much to talk about, then there you go.
The U.S. Supreme Court has just upheld a Tennessee law that bans gender-affirming care for minors, even if it's prescribed by a doctor. Our chief legal affairs correspondent, Paula Reed, is following all these developments for us. Paula, what can you tell us about the Supreme Court's decision?
Well, this is one of the big cases we've been watching this term because roughly half of states have a ban that is similar to the one in Tennessee. And this focuses on access to certain medications that can facilitate a gender transition. After Tennessee banned minors from accessing these medications for this purpose, families of transgender youth, they brought a lawsuit saying, hey, this violates the Equal Protection Clause because other minors who are using the same medication for different purposes can still have access to it. But today in this 6-3 decision, it fell along party lines.
Yeah, this doesn't at all affect cisgender children who are prescribed puberty blockers, you know? Like, they are arguing that there is nothing sex discriminatory about allowing hormone blockers to be prescribed to children who are cisgender, but not to children who are transgender. Like the idea, the idea that there is no sex category, that's not a demographic factor in this decision making is lunacy. It's absolutely insane. The question is not about, like, you know, the most effective, like, on-label use of this medication. The question is about whether it violates the Equal Protections Clause, which it clearly does, but, you know, whatever. The Constitution's not real.
The Supreme Court affirmed this law in Tennessee. And in the majority, Chief Justice John Roberts wrote, this case carries with it the weight of fierce scientific and policy debates about the safety, efficacy, and propriety of medical treatments in an evolving field. Now, 3 liberal justices dissented. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, she wrote the court...
It also doesn't, by the way. I think this is total bullshit, okay? It's just about the 14th Amendment. It's not about the safety or efficacy of the medicine. It's literally just a question of the 14th Amendment. If it was about the efficacy of the medication, then we wouldn't be bringing this to the Supreme Court. We're talking about the 14th Amendment here, you know? We're talking about whether or not yeah, exactly. Then why aren't they, why isn't the Supreme Court issuing rulings on, like, off-label medical use being wrong generally? Like, that's not the job of the Supreme Court.
Sonia Sotomayor, she wrote the court, quote, abandons transgender children and their families to political whims. And she wrote, quote, in sadness, I dissent. Now, going forward, what we'll be looking for is the impact that this decision has on other possible laws, because over the past several years, we've seen a lot of laws targeting transgender individuals, specifically minors. And after this decision, we now know that those laws, they're going to be reviewed under a lower standard, making it easier for them to pass judicial review.
What major cases are we still waiting?
Yeah, it's pretty bad, guys. Sorry. Can expect to see a wider range of bans coming out. Trump is also going to cut the suicide hotline for LGBTQ. This just happened? I thought I remember this being mentioned before. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline will no longer utilize its LGBTQ youth service line starting July 17th. Okay, just, you know, specifically. Okay. The Trump administration says the move will, quote, focus on serving all help seekers. The pro-death party? It's so blatantly malevolent. Yeah, they don't really pretend very hard, do they? Please cover this. What is this? Trump asked the Juventus players standing behind him if women could make their team.
For open for that. He was never for open borders, and he was never for, if you think, he was never for transgender for everybody, or men playing in women's sports. You know, he was never for that. Have you ever had women? Could a woman make your team, fellas? Tell me. You think? You're being nice. What do you think? Think a woman could make the team? General managers, what do you think?
Difficult.
Don't say it.
We have a very good women's team, though.
You do have, right? Yeah. But they should be playing with women, right? You know, it's one of those things. One of those things. See, they're very diplomatic.
Remember when he didn't care about this at all? Remember that wonderful point? Remember when he just admitted that he didn't know anything about this and people just go crazy when he talks about it?